Ah man, I've waited so long to make this video. There's always something that comes up, either it's a new phone or exams or some stupid assignment for the college, whatever. Finally got a chance. Anyway, so here's a gist of these particular types of videos. Essentially what I want to do is I want to compare phones that came out a while ago, usually like the first quarter of the year, and like the OnePlus 11 and the S23 in this case. I want to see if they have actually improved in the areas where they were lacking back when I compared it. So I guess I made the comparison back in February if I'm not wrong, or maybe March. So it's been a while, there have been software updates, and I'm gonna see if things have really gotten better, especially with the S23, because there's been a lot of talk about the S23 improving in a variety of areas. So yeah, it's gonna be fun. And this time, there's nothing that's gonna stop me. I'm telling you, there could be a tactical nuke aimed right for my butthole, but oh no. I wanna make this video, I'm gonna tell you right now. That was intense, a little too much maybe. Let's jump in. Alright, so first and foremost, I can't really take any sunset shots or anything of that sort because, as you can probably tell from this image, it's very overcast. So we're just gonna have to improvise. We'll get to that stuff. Although I do want to point out that the OnePlus is making the shot look a little bit more appealing by warming it up, even though that was obviously not the case, because the S23 looks spot on. That's exactly how it looked. The white balance is essentially perfect. It's not always perfect. We'll get to the issue soon enough. But yeah, I think it's doing fairly well, although there is one other thing. The S23 does have a little bit more noise. Now then, zoom. See, it's been one of my pet peeves ever since the S23 launched. I've talked about it and basically complained about it in every single camera compressor I made with the S23 Ultra. You want to check them out? Link is in the description. So, this is 1X. Of course, both of them look good. Take a look at the contrast. They're essentially the same and they have really good contrast. Even though it's an overcast situation, it looks good, not flat. And that's the key word here, because when we zoom in, there's 3x on the S23, 2x on the OnePlus. Both are optical, but notice the contrast. The OnePlus maintains the same level of contrast for both its 1x and 2x, while the S23, it decreases a fair bit. I don't think it's particularly bad at 3x, at least in this shot. It looks fairly nice, not terrible or anything, but you know, I like more contrast in most situations. And so my pick in this case would be the OnePlus 11, but the real issue starts later. And I am kind of disappointed that Samsung didn't really fix the problem, because it really is a problem. It's not like a preference based thing. You look at this 10x zoom shot on the S23 and anyone in their right mind is going to say that yes, it looks flat. Not exactly the kind of 10x shot that I want, now is it? The details are great and all, but the image itself, not quite. And I really wish they would fix this. Now in this 30x shot, I think it's not terrible. It could use some more contrast, sure, but it doesn't look as bad as the 10x did. So it can fluctuate a little, but in general, I still think that the contrast needs to be significantly higher, and it really is something that Samsung can fix with a simple software update, but they didn't really do that, at least not yet. I don't think it's gonna happen anytime later, but you know, it could. There's a 0.1% chance. Since we cannot have warm sunlight, yeah, I kind of had to create it at home. I had the warm light fall on our subject, and you know, it's my comparison, so obviously I had to add a little bit of white backlight to really make it a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging, and a little bit more fun. You know, I'm crazy like that. But anyways, I think overall both are good in their own right. I think the S23 is doing a fantastic job in lifting up the shadows, giving us a ton of detail. The overall detail preservation and sharpness is also high on the S23. But the OnePlus is giving us a little bit more contrast. Now, you might like that. Honestly, even though I prefer higher contrast, I think the S23 is just doing a generally better job in this case. Now, ultra-wide. See, this is also something I've complained about time and again, and the issue with the S23 Ultra here, it's in the hardware. And that's not something you can fix with software updates. I would say that in a situation like this, and let me just describe the situation for you. It was indoors. There was very little daylight coming in because it's overcast, and also I had the curtains drawn. Basically indoors, medium to low light condition, and I think the S23 is doing fairly well. considering the situation, I think the OnePlus in general is better. It has less noise, slightly more detail. Up until this stage of lighting, the S23 can hold its own, but any lower, low light night mode situations, that's where it really starts to suffer. You'll see soon enough. Moving on though, see, this is a macro shot, and apparently the previous photography comparison I made between these two way back in, about a few months ago, yeah, I forgot to include a macro shot, so I guess it's better to be late than never. So, I mean, let's just face it, alright? The difference between the two is basically negligible. There's the S23, which can get a little bit closer. That's pretty evident, but that's about it. With high-res, however, see, this is where both of these phones had slightly different types of problems. You see, in general, you're gonna get fairly nice shots as you would expect, but when we zoom in, you can see that even though the resolution is the same, yeah, I know that the 50 megapixel on the S23 is binned down, so it's technically supposed to be higher quality, but whatever the case, the 50 megapixel mode on the OnePlus 11, it's not cutting it, not even by a long shot. There is literally no way that the 50 megapixel mode should look this over sharpened and this, I guess, not detailed on the OnePlus 11, because I'd really hope that OnePlus would fix this. This was definitely something that they needed to do with a software update. They really did do that, and the reason I say it is because you really can fix it with the software update. It's a software that's not taking advantage of the hardware. The hardware is good. That's been tried and proven at this point. And as for the 200 megapixel mode on the S23, see, this was, I guess you could call it a complaint, but it's not really a complaint because it doesn't really matter, so to speak. Essentially, the thing is, the 200 megapixel mode doesn't give you, or it didn't give you, particularly higher detail as opposed to the 50 megapixel mode. It was almost negligible level of difference. I do want to point out that this is a 500% crop, so do bear that in mind, but even then, I do think that I see more detail on the S23 Ultra with 200 megapixels mode as opposed to the 50 megapixels we had previously. It's a small difference, but I think Samsung improved it a little bit. Also bear in mind that this is during overcast conditions, so in ideal lighting you should get even better results on the S23. Now speaking of high-res, of course you have to take a look at the 40 megapixel mode on the OnePlus 11's ultra-wide. Now I had hoped that this would also be something that they would have fixed, but they didn't really do anything with the main camera's high-res, so naturally in the ultra-wide you don't really see much. And this is what really surprises me, because the OnePlus 11, it has a touch less over-sharpening and processing artifacts that you can see, but in general, the S23 actually has more sharpness. That is because of the processing, of course. The processing does a lot of work when it comes to the ultra-wide camera. That's pretty obvious, but still, I'm just saying that I want to see a little bit more difference than this, right? I want to see more detail on the OnePlus 11 when I'm using the 40 megapixel mode, because otherwise, it's kind of pointless. And that's never a good thing. Now for portrait and selfies, I was initially not even going to include them, but then I took this shot and then I realized something. The S23 is still compensating in certain instances like this one. You see the OnePlus 11? It's exactly how it looked during the situation. The lighting was as such. We had warm yellowish light falling on my face. The background had a white backlight, and both phones are doing a great job with dynamic range and all that stuff, but the warm light on the OnePlus looks very accurate. The S23 not quite as much. I guess the best way to describe it is that the S23 looks like I have saturated skin tones with just plain white light falling on my face, while the OnePlus is really embodying that warm light. I know it's a small difference, I'm nitpicking and whatnot, but hey, at this price point with the S23 at least, nitpicking is a necessity. And of course, we've also got to take a look at night portraits. See, it's nice that OnePlus included night portraits this time around, but it's not particularly good. There are very few phones out there that have particularly good night portraits. The S23 is obviously one of them, although it could use a little bit more contrast maybe. The OnePlus on the other hand, it just looks weird. There's something off with the colors and the contrast is maybe a little too high, and that's coming from me. For me, if the contrast is too high, well then there's certainly a problem there. But yeah, overall the detail preservation is not quite good, and as I mentioned, the skin tones just... there's some issues here that really needed resolving and that did not happen, which is kind of sad. Now, before we move on, I do want to point out that I get that I'm complaining a lot about both of these phones, but that's because I'm only looking at the troubled areas. If you want to check out the full camera comparison, once again, link is in the description. You'll find the playlist, you'll find many more comparisons in there. You'll probably like it if you're enjoying this type of stuff. So anyways, regular night mode. Now this is going to be our benchmark. Both phones are doing a fantastic job, and yes, I know, I messed up the angle. I'm human, sorry. But anyways, you're not going to have any issues with the main camera. It's the ultra-wide that's going to suffer. And it only suffers on the S23, just in case you didn't know. Because, I mean, do I need to point out anything? It's sad. And it's not something that can be fixed with software updates. That much has been made more than clear. It's a hardware problem. What Samsung really needs to do is buckle down and give us like a 1-inch sensor on the ultra-wide camera, because that's what's really needed. The main camera is good, it's more than capable of handling itself, but the ultra-wide software can only do so much. Even in this case, I would say that the software is doing about as much as it physically possibly can, but it's not nearly as good as the OnePlus 11, not by a long shot. Similar situation here, just the sheer level of details, the colors, everything just looks so much more, I guess the word is neat on the OnePlus 11 as opposed to the S23, which is not really cutting it for me, at least, quality-wise. Now finally, for ultra low light. Now I remember the OnePlus struggling a little bit when it came to ultra low light situations like these, but it seems this has been something that they have improved a little, because the OnePlus took a 2-second exposure, which is already quite impressive, and is giving us impeccable details, more details than the S23, and the noise reduction is spot on. Now the S23 on the other hand, it may have slightly less details, which is a little disappointing, but the kicker is that it took a 4-second exposure, so the OnePlus is doing, I guess you could say, exponentially better than the S23 in this case. So that's right for this comparison. Yes, I do believe that there have been some fairly significant improvements on the S23, especially when it comes to white balance and just general detail preservation and so on and so forth. It works far more smoothly and consistently now. That's very important, needless to say. The OnePlus on the other hand, I guess it could have used a little bit more love, because especially in the 50 megapixel mode on the main camera and the 40 megapixels on the ultra-wide, they could really use some software tweaking so that the sensors can be really taken advantage of. That's really not happening. As long as you're taking regular shots, you're not going to notice the issue, but the moment you go to high res, the issue really comes to the forefront. Well, in case you're wondering, the video side of things, I would say both are pretty similar now as they were before. I mean, there have been maybe some small improvements that can be very hard to really decipher, but for the most part, nothing major, nothing broad. The OnePlus, I still think it requires some things in the video department, like 4K 60 ultra-wide and proper 2x optical zoomed-in video and stuff like that. The S23, I think, is more than good enough for an Android device. It's probably one of the best amongst the Android devices. So yeah, that's a wrap for this one. I'll be seeing you guys sooner with many more to come. Cheers.